Welcome, everybody, to the Let Purple Rain podcast. Please like and subscribe. I'm your host, Joe Arpasi, otherwise known as Purple Rain. I started my CFF work back in 2008, and after stepping away for 8 years, I returned in 2024 as Purple Rain. You can follow me on X at the handle you see on the screen, and you can find all of my content on letpurplerain.com. I want to welcome today's guest, Justin Leo, otherwise known as Volume Pigs. You can find his work at volumepigs.com, and he is also a feature writer at Campus to Canton and Fantrax. You can follow him on X at the handle that you see on the screen. And he was one of the people in CFF I talked to the most before I decided to come back to the industry in 2024. You know, Justin, I finally got you on the podcast now. It's great having you on here. For those watching that don't know you, could you review the work you've done in the CFF space along with any of your plans that you got coming up here in 2025?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, let me say I appreciate you having me on here. It's always good chatting CFF with you. I know you mentioned it earlier. Yeah, last year we used to hop on around noon some weeks, and we would just chat CFF and just chop it up. So this should be fun today. Thanks for inviting me on. Yeah, I think you covered it. I mean, I have my own site, volumepigs.com. Those who follow your Substack probably have seen me. You can see me at Campus to Canton as well, and I assume my Twitter will be tagged whenever this is published, so you can just follow that link and find my profile.
Yeah, and I'll go over a couple of announcements that on my side. March and April here at letpurplerain.com, I'm going to continue providing news and fantasy stock report updates from spring camps across the country. I'm also going to be continuing the 7-part CFF coaching systems series. I'm going over the best offensive systems for specific type of fantasy players, example, dual threat quarterbacks, or what we're discussing today, workhorse running backs. I'm going to have tons of great guests, just like Justin, on these podcast episodes. It's an invaluable tool for your CFF drafts. You can find the entire series at letpurplerain.com. Links are in the description below. I'm extremely excited to bring you a special promotional event this year. Go ahead and check it out. Do you love college football? Do you love fantasy football? My name is Joe Arpasi, and I have just the thing for you. I'm the man behind LetPurpleRain.com, your premier college fantasy football resource. And I'm hosting a 52-man college fantasy football league. New world order. The winner of my league is going to take home this custom championship belt provided by this league's sponsor, armchampionshipbelts.com. If you want a chance to compete for this bad boy, go to letpurplerain.com and sign up to be a premium subscriber today. All premium subscribers are automatically entered into the drawing to see who makes this league. And I'm going to be running drawings from March all the way through July. That means the longer that you're a premium subscriber, the more chances you have to be entered into this 52-man challenge. Let me tell you something, brother. Winning this belt's not going to be easy. You're going to have to contend with the new world order of college fantasy football. You're not only going to be competing against me, you're going to be competing against Eric Froton from NBC Sports and FantasyPoints.com, Jared Palmgren from Chasing the Natty Podcast and CampusToCanton.com, and John McKechnie from RotoWire.com. So go sign up today to become a premium subscriber at LetPurpleRain.com so you have a chance to get a golden ticket to the show. You're not going to want to miss out on a chance to win this baby because this belt is just too sweet. Man, I am so pumped to be hosting the 2025 Battle for the Belt 52-Man League Challenge. Special thanks to ArmChampionshipBelts.com for being this event's sponsor. I'm going to be doing the second of 6 golden ticket giveaways live here on YouTube on Wednesday, April 9th. If you aren't already a premium subscriber, sign up now so you'll automatically be entered into the golden ticket giveaway. I also want to throw out there, check out my CFF apparel shop. I have a link in the description below. I've got short and long sleeve shirts, tons of color options, can koozies. Eventually, sometime here, I'll be getting more designs to come here later in 2025. Still pretty busy getting the year kicked off here, but definitely keep your eye out for that here. And as we transition to talk about today's show, we are going to be reviewing the top CFF coaching systems for workhorse running backs. It would only be appropriate to have Mr. Volume Picks Justin Leo as our guest for today's show. YouTube will be the home of the preview show where we are going to review my number 11 through 15 coaching systems. LetPurpleRain.com will be the exclusive home of the top 10 coaching systems. For a coaching system to qualify, the career average of a coach's running back one must average a 40% carry workload and average 16 plus carries a game or 192 carries per season. I rank these coaching systems by a combination of career average fantasy points scored and the amount of seasons logged in my historical database, which goes back to 2018. Coaches with more data in the historical database get a bump up in the rankings. Coaches that only have one or two seasons of data do get moved down a little bit. Okay, now that I've covered that, let's dive into some college fantasy football. Now we can go ahead and kick off with my number 15 coach, Barry Lunney Jr., the offensive coordinator at Illinois. Players that would be affected for this year would be Caden Fegan and Josh McCray. Looking at Lunney here, he had great performances from 2022 and 2021. McCormick at UTSA, I'm having a struggle talk here, we're just getting started. McCormick at UTSA, he scored 267 fantasy points on 298 carries. And then Brown at Illinois had 279 fantasy points on 328 carries. But we've now seen split backfields the last two seasons. In 2023, Love had 116 carries and Fegan had 95 carries. Last year, we saw McCray with 117 carries and Lowry with 97 carries. We thought Fegan would be the workhorse back last year. He got injured in late September, but before that injury, he was only averaging 13 carries a game, which is kind of surprising for what we were all expecting. Do you think the Illinois running game will remain a split carry situation in 2025, Justin?
Yeah, this one is kind of difficult. Somebody who was following that backfield closely last year, I remember the beat writers and even the quotes from the coaches, it was pretty suggestive that Caden Fegan was going to be the guy. I mean, the beat writers were very emphatic about that sort of in the off season. And, of course, beat writers get it wrong sometimes, and sometimes it's not even their fault. Sometimes I'm sure the staff have a vision or an idea of what they want to do on offense in the spring. Season starts, realize, okay, this is maybe not as good as we thought it would be, change on the fly. And then, as you mentioned, there was that injury too with Fegan, but it wasn't exactly like he was just like dominating the carry share for the first like 4 weeks leading up to that anyways. As far as I know, Josh McCray and Aiden Lafferty are both back on the team. So that's not great, right? That's not a great sign. And in particular, Lafferty, you're starting to get some significant volume. I'm also struggling here. We're just warming up here. Significant volume towards the end of the season. I think it was like 16 and 12 carries in his last two appearances. One of those games, he went nuclear. He had like 3 scores. So it's hard for me to see him fading away. And then also, McCray has just been hanging around forever as well. Fegan, do we know what his injury even was? I don't even remember exactly what the injury was.
I do
If it's
not.
something,
I do not have it pulled up. I could try and look it up real quick here if you want to keep talking.
yeah, I mean, if it's something significant like a knee injury, that's obviously I would basically say, well, almost no shot. He's going to come in and just start dominating the carry share. If it's something less significant, I'm still interested in taking a few dart throws on Fegan at like the very end of like a best ball. I think it's worth, just taking the shot on the upside there. Certainly, though, he's not a player who's going to get drafted in the range this year that he was last year, right? If he's starting to creep up into like the mid 6, 7, 8 round range for drafts last year, I don't see that happening again this year. And certainly, I wouldn't draft him anywhere near that range. But I think at like the back end of a draft, just as a dart throw, take a shot, maybe. Just because I know they were really fired up about him last year, and they think he's a good player. So we'll see. I do like the system, but I don't feel high conviction that there's going to be one guy who really dominates the carry share this year.
I agree. I looked up. Fegan had a undisclosed injury. Our favorite.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love that.
But like I'm right there with you. You know, beat writers were all over Fegan going into last year, and when I was looking at his carries, I went through the game logs. As I mentioned, only 13 carries a game he had while healthy and while the clear number one guy. Like it wasn't like, well, hey, McCrae's, it was a close battle. Fegan barely won it. Like Fegan was the guy. They just
Yeah.
limited him, and just watching some of their games too was frustrating because Fegan would like hammer the ball down from 20 to 20. They get in the red zone and they start throwing the ball for touchdowns. Or
It's sort of the
McCrae would come
opposite
in.
that you'd usually see.
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
it was almost
yeah, and especially with a big back like Fagan. So I'm there with you. It's tough for me to want to invest in this group. I'm not even going to use last year's mentality, and this is a good coaching system to look at, but it's just one of those things of we had two huge seasons, and now we're looking at probably a third season where it's probably going to be split up. We're not going to have a guy with 200 carries, and who knows what happens even in 2026. I think they might just have to bring in some monster running back in the transfer portal before we kind of start looking back to some of Barry Lunney's numbers that he had from 2022 and 2021.
Yeah, the one thing I will say, given that it was an undisclosed injury, and you mentioned it seemed like they were limiting him to start the year even, I do wonder if he was healthy even to start the year, because it was just very strange. Now that I'm thinking about it more, like
Mm-hmm.
even that first game, he had a good statistical game if I remember, but like he hardly had any touches, which was just, it was kind of bizarre. So I do wonder if there was some sort of LJ Martin thing happening behind the scenes where he wasn't fully healthy, but which gives me a little bit more optimism. Maybe he can bounce back next year, but still limited optimism.
Well, and he was injured in 2023, and that was one of the things we were trying to find out a year ago going into spring was how healthy is
Yeah,
he going to be? Can he be the main guy? So he might just be one of those guys who's just always dinged up too.
that would be unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, transitioning here to our next coaching system, we have Kirby Moore, offensive coordinator from Missouri. This year's player would be Ahmad Hardy. And from 2023 through 2022, the RB1 here for Kirby Moore averaged 275 fantasy points on 268 carries. Last season, Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel split the running back workload. Both guys moved up from the group of five schools up here to the SEC. Hardy's making that same move up to the Power Four. Right now, there's no real competition in this backfield. And and when we look over those stats, like you see a big jump, a big dip. Like last year, Marcus Carroll only had 142 fantasy points compared to the average that I said from the two seasons before of 275 carries. Justin, do you think Hardy will be the guy this year, or does Missouri sign another running back in the spring portal?
Huh. Yeah, that's the key question that I was just about to mention. That's one I'm sort of watching in the spring to see, what happens. I would say in general too, this archetype, the G5 running back promoting to P4, I can't think of many examples where this has gone well. I can think of a lot that haven't gone well, and precisely in this backfield, we can look at Marcus Carroll, who really did something very similar to Hardy. In fact, he had a better season than Hardy at
Mm-hmm.
Georgia State the year prior, and then disappears more or less, at the SEC level. And I really like Hardy. He was a true freshman last year, so it's a little different than Carroll. I mean, Hardy broke out immediately, and I love my Mississippi kids. They're tough, but SEC is a different level. And while there aren't any names that immediately stand out, of course there are other players within that depth chart, right? And every year there's guys that just emerge out of nowhere. Hardy was one of those players on a different team, right? A guy who
Yeah.
wasn't on our radar who just came out of nowhere. So that's an SEC program. There's going to be other players in the mix. I don't feel high conviction in Hardy being the guy, but it's not really personal to him. It's more sort of I'm generalizing looking at that archetype. I mean, it's sort of odd, really, that the FCS to P4 pipeline has actually been much better than the G5 to P4 pipeline. I can think of some
Mm-hmm.
examples: Desmond Reed, Scatabo, even at this program, right? Cody Schrader. Whereas the G5 to P4, it's like, okay, I can't even think of one off the top of my head. I'm sure there have been some that have done well, but I can't think of any right now. And so I'm worried about Hardy. I like him as the 1A. I don't know that like what that's going to look like in terms of carries though. Is it going to be 250? I'd be very surprised. Can he get to 200 total touches? That's a more interesting question. I think it's
Yeah,
still possible.
yeah, I agree with you on the 200 touches. It's one thing to move from the group of five to the power four. It's another to do it to the SEC or the Big Ten, the top of
Yeah.
that power four level. So it's going to be tough. And I'm right there with you. It's like, if you had to look at it today, you have to assume he's going to get the lion's share of carries. I mean, like him not getting 200 carries seems ridiculous with who's on their roster today and the information we have today. Um, who knows what running backs put their name in the portal in the spring, and that's going to be the huge question. So drafting Hardy right now, I'm staying away from him just because we have no clue what they might do. And I don't remember what the difference was between when Missouri signed Carroll and then when Missouri signed Nate Noel. I don't remember if it was a similar thing where there was some gap in between or they did it both in the same portal period. I think they might have done them both in the winter portal because they were both in spring
Yeah,
camp.
that's what I remember as well.
Yeah. But I do think like it's one of those interesting things of I'm going to stay cold on Hardy for now. Um, he gets through spring. They don't bring in any other big names at running back. I'm going to warm up to him. I'll probably take some stabs at him, but I'm not expecting what we see here, these numbers from 2023 and 2022, where you're getting 270 some odd fantasy points. I just think that's going to be you'll be drafting him too high if you go that way, and I'd rather let somebody else reach there, and I can find a different player at a better value. Do you have any different approach that you'll be taking between now and after spring
No,
for drafts?
you hit the nail on the head. That's pretty much, I'm in exact agreement. Like, and that'll be a theme, I think, with this every running back room we talk about. Like at the right price, like any
Hmm.
player is sort of viable.
Hmm.
But I don't want to draft Hardy really, you know, I would almost say 10th round beyond that. I'm kind of interested, but I don't think he's going to get that
Yeah,
far back in drafts. So, where he's getting selected now, from where I've seen, mid round, yeah, I'm out on him there.
yeah. Going to my number 13 coaching system, I have Gerard Parker, head coach from Troy. The player that applies this year would be Damian Taylor. We're seeing a trend in these coaching histories here. Two good seasons from 2021 and 2023 with a workhorse running back. We had Brown, who had 230 fantasy points on 223 carries. Estime, who had 264 fantasy points on 210 carries. But then last season we saw it was Parker's first year as a head coach. The carries were split between Taylor, who had 173, and Gerald Green, who had 111. Green is now gone. You got no real competition for Taylor in the backfield. Things are lining up like we should go back to seeing this old history from Parker from 2023 and 2021. And, I really like Taylor's chances to get 200 plus carries this season. Where do you stand on Taylor's 2025 fantasy outlook?
Yeah, so this is one that I am excited about. I actually have an article that I wrote on him probably like a month ago that I just haven't released yet. I'm probably in the next couple weeks. And you hit the nail on the head there. Green, his sort of split backfield partner, he's out now. I think he ran out of eligibility. And to my surprise, when I sat down to write that article on Taylor, a month or so ago, I didn't even realize he was a 1,000-yard rusher last year.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was maybe the quietest 1,000 yards because he wasn't. I don't remember him really being CFF viable in most formats last year. I don't remember seeing him on a lot of rosters. He wasn't really a player I was looking to pick up, throughout the season. I think he sort of had 2 or 3 games where he had a lot of rushing yards, but
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, like game in, game out, he wasn't, very productive. But that's fine, given that we're headed into the next season with Green leaving. The one thing I would say is, you look at Parker, and definitely he has some notable patterns there. But his running backs, he's got a good pattern. I would say his running backs are never getting like 250 plus carries.
Yeah.
So like the good outcome you're looking for here is somewhere between that 200, 225 carry range, which again, that's fine, if Taylor's being really sort of efficient, and 220 carries, that's fantastic volume in and of itself as well. Especially for a guy who already had 1,000 yards rushing last year, and I think he only had like 170 carries. So we're talking about, if even like 40% of Green's carries, migrate over, hitting that 200 carry threshold should be pretty seamless. And so this is one I'm pretty interested in. I hope his price doesn't push up too high because I think he's perfect as a mid-round player.
Right
I
where he's
don't
at
think he
right now,
has the
yeah, I like him exactly where he's fallen right now.
I don't think just again because of the system that like he's not going to be a 250, 300 carry guy. I don't think he has that like 2,000 yard nuclear upside, but I think he's a great, like very good running back. So you don't want to like take him in the first round or something like that. But as long as he's like a mid-round player, RB2, RB3 in that range, perfect.
Yep, and I'm looking at the 2021 West Virginia stats for Letty Brown here, and let's do a little comparison. So, Damian Taylor had 173 carries last year. I do not see it very difficult for him to land at about 210. Brown had
Yeah.
223, so we know like hey, there's it's in a range.
Hmm.
Brown only had 55 more yards on about 50 more carries. So the
Yeah.
yardage is not bad. He's already in a good yardage range. What really hurt Taylor last year was only having 7 rushing touchdowns. Brown had 13. So to make up 5 touchdowns with an added, let's say, 40 carries, I
Yeah.
don't think that's unreasonable. And Brown put up 230 fantasy points that year. So I'm kind of agreeing with you. There's a realistic expectation. He could be, especially early in a draft where you want someone that you have an idea of the player, they're coming back in the same system, the system like he's going to be a safer guy. You're not making a projection pick. You're not making a flyer pick early in the draft. He's a guy where you're like, hey, he's going to be a good producing steady Eddie that I can rely on early in the draft. And that's kind of where I view like it's not going to be that hard for him to make the leap from what he did in 2024 to what we saw from Brown in 2021.
Yeah. So you think he gets 200 fantasy points pretty seamlessly?
I don't see how he doesn't because it really was touchdowns that held him back. Now you
Hmm.
don't have another guy, stealing. You don't have Gerald Green stealing, rushing opportunities and those touchdowns. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if you're going with a typical one rushing touchdown for every 100 yards, he was off pace by 3 touchdowns last year with a
Yeah.
guy stealing, production. So those touchdowns are bound to be there, and we don't know also if Troy's going to have a star receiver again this year that
I
could
was just
be,
gonna say,
yeah, that could be
yeah.
stealing those touchdown opportunities. So, I mean, I definitely would think Taylor should be good for 200 fantasy points. I'm slowly dipping into projections, early projections right now, but I'm going through the big schools. So I don't know when I'm going to get to Troy here, but like I said, I'm kind of looking at Letty Brown from 2021. It's not a big jump for him to just, I mean, with 40 carries to make up he makes up 4 rushing touchdowns with an extra 40 carries, and he already has the yardage where Brown had. Like, and Brown scored
Yeah.
230. I think I'm right there with you. I really, really like Taylor. I'm high on Taylor this year to be that, hey, he's going to be a productive, safe guy that you can count on as a running back 2 or running back 3 on your roster.
Yeah, one last thing, I guess I'm gonna sort of pose this as a question because I don't remember. Is Taylor used that often as a receiver? Because I know Letty Brown was, right? Like
Mm,
some of his 230 fantasy points is coming from receiving work, if I recall correctly. Because Letty was a pretty good receiver when he was at West Virginia.
my mouse is all over the place. I'm trying to pull that up to look it up here. Bear with me.
Yeah,
Um,
it's all good. It's all good. I
let's
can look as well.
I was about to say I'm going through my massive spreadsheet, which you know how it's grown to become even more massive this year. Um, all right. Last year he had 4 targets, 3 receptions,
Yeah.
but 1 touchdown. But like
So
in the
that's a difference, right? Because
it,
Letty Brown in 21, I'm looking at it's like
yeah he had a
36 receptions, 217 yards. So
yeah on 55 targets. And we didn't
yeah,
see
that's
that with we
significant.
didn't see that with Estime at Notre Dame. So that kind of does look like I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to stay Taylor 4 targets last year, Estime 18 targets a year before that. That might be kind of the mold that they're going to go with
Yeah.
moving forward. But like I said, I would not be surprised here. 200, like I said, 210 carries, potential
Yeah.
1,200 yards, and
Yeah.
I mean should hit 11 touchdowns.
Yeah. Certainly he should increase on seven, right? I
Yeah,
mean, even if he just repeats what he did this year with 1,000 yards, you would expect probably closer to 10.
yeah. All right, let's move ahead to our number 12 coach. And I'm going to butcher this name, guys. uh, Kirk, Kirk Ciarrocca?
Yeah, I don't know that I can do much
Kirk
better.
C.
I mean,
Our boy Kirk
Ciarrocca,
C.
maybe.
Ciarrocca?
Yeah,
Ciarrocca. That might be it.
perhaps.
Ciarrocca. I'm terrible at pronouncing names, guys, and I'm trying to do a video podcast. Heaven help me. He is the offensive coordinator at Rutgers. Players for this year are Antoine Raymond, C.J. Campbell, and Samuel Brown. Looking at Kirk here, he's been consistent with his carry distribution throughout his history. You see a career average of 250 carries. The lowest amount that we saw was 202 in 2018 when he was at Minnesota. Touchdowns has been the major issue when you start going through his history here. He's had 3 seasons with single digit touchdowns, 2 seasons with double digit touchdowns. Kyle Monangai is now off to the NFL. Lots of questions revolve around his replacement. And Antoine Raymond finished 2024 strong with 184 yards and 5 touchdowns in the last 2 games of the year. You have Samuel Brown, who looked to be the next running back in line after a strong first month of the season, but then he injures his leg. He misses the rest of the year, which helped open up the door for Raymond. And then in the winter transfer portal, you get C.J. Campbell, transfers in from Florida Atlantic. He just happened to score 235 fantasy points in 2024. A lot of that was through the passing game, which this offense really doesn't cater to. Um, but we can now have 3 guys all vying for Monangai's spot. Like I mentioned, it's easy to look at Monangai's performance last year, but I'm kind of the thing that I've been noticing is, like I said, 2023, 2019, and 2018. The majority of seasons he has running backs score less than their running back one scores less than 10 rushing touchdowns. Justin, how do you see this running back room shaking out this year?
Yeah, so for this one, I wonder if 2025 isn't going to look similarly to Soroka's earlier Minnesota backfields with
Mm-hmm.
Rodney Smith and Mo Ibrahim in 18 and 19. I don't know if it was both of those players both years, but I know one running back had like around 200 carries and another one had around 100 carries. Um, and then obviously in 2019 there, Smith is still seeing 228, which, if that ends up being the case for whoever's RB1 here, that's probably just fine. But I have a hard time seeing like one dominating the share.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a product of the fact that, they brought in CJ Campbell, who had a big year with FAU last year. Again, another G5 running back coming up to the P4. So it's another one that kind of scares me.
Yeah.
And then obviously you mentioned it, there's Raymond there. He had a big bowl game. Um, the nice thing is at least that CJ Campbell, he's got a lot of receiving ability, whereas Raymond, albeit he was a true freshman last year, they didn't really use him as a receiver. So, skill sets maybe are different enough where both players can kind of fill in. But again, that's not really what you want to hear as a
Mm-hmm.
CFF drafter anyway. So, I think best case scenario that I'm looking for is probably that 2019 Minnesota split where one can still get 200 plus carries and another one's probably going to settle around 100. I have a hard time seeing either Raymond or Campbell getting phased out completely. Whether it's Raymond who's the guy who gets closer to 200 and Campbell's the one who's at 100 with a little bit more receiving work, or vice versa. Either way, I don't know that the RB1 there is going to be just a complete sort of fantasy monster, but I can see a scenario where one, whoever that RB1 is viable, right? And maybe has a place sort of in deeper leagues, or as like, if you're starting lots of running backs, or even just in the best ball, a guy who pops off every now and then. But one thing to mention as well is Rutgers' schedule last year was really easy, and that was a big sort of part of the appeal of Monangai.
Mm-hmm.
This year it's a little tougher, right? They're going to be playing some harder teams, and Rutgers is a better program now than they were maybe a couple of years ago, but they're still sort of a bottom feeder in that conference. So you want to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you that the seasons that we have on the screen here, where the running back one did not score 10 rushing touchdowns, you have 186 fantasy points, 174, 174. I think that's a good estimate that any of us should have looking at this running back room, whoever wins it out. Don't expect 200 points, but not too far below that. And to keep that in mind when you're looking at where you want to draft, um, I'm like you. I can see it like these early Minnesota backfields. I do look at a couple of things. I do think I'm going to be watching for, and I covered this in my Burning Questions article series, but I'm going to be watching for if Antoine Raymond just comes into spring camp and blows everybody out of the water. I don't. I
Yeah.
think if there's anyone that could just wrangle this job, 240 carries, no problem, and 10 touchdowns, Raymond's the only one I see who could maybe do it. But I'm not going to buy into that scenario unless, like, we are just seeing a massive drumbeat of talking about how amazing Raymond is all throughout the spring. Nobody's really like the other guys aren't really being brought up nearly as much. It's clear he's running away with this job before fall camp starts. One thing that I want to throw out there, to the listeners and everything, don't forget about Sam Brown. Sam Brown was that next guy in line, and he was playing really well at the start of the year. He's a wild card in this, and that's one thing that I find kind of scary. Like I want to see what news is coming out about Sam Brown's participation in spring camp. If he's participating and not just non-contact drills on the side, I want to see if he's going to kind of challenge in this mix. Assuming he's not in the mix, his injuries keep him kind of out of competition till the fall. One thing I do like about this pairing of Campbell and Raymond is that if you're in a best ball league, I don't know if I'd recommend this for a redraft, but in a best ball league, um, whoever, like, let someone else draft one of those guys first, then draft the other guy later in a draft as a potential nuclear option if somebody gets hurt. So I do think that this is a nuclear candidate backfield. Um, and a lot of these split carry ones, I'm kind of viewing this way. I think because there's a lot of scenarios of guys battling for jobs, if you want to wait, like me, I wouldn't mind, if CJ Campbell's sitting there and I'm like in the 20th round or later, take a stab at him as maybe my running back 7 or deeper just as a potential nuclear option. I think that's one thing out there that I haven't heard anyone else talking about quite yet. I do think other people probably will start talking about that nuclear idea as summer goes along. Do you have any other items that you wanted to throw out here for the situation before we move on?
Well, I mean, you talk about draft strategy there. Depending on, what the price is on both of these players, if they both end up settling and keep dropping in drafts, you might be able to just double up and
Hmm.
just sort of corner the backfield. Which again, if one gets injured, you have a sort of nice upside there. But even if it doesn't happen that way, and it's just like, okay, 1 week one pops off, and then the other does it, it still sort of provides some value. Sam Brown, though, I mean, it's a good mention, but he had a pretty serious knee injury, didn't he? Right, like last year. So I'm a little bit wary that he's going to
Yeah.
be much of a factor this year. Certainly something to watch, though. So
Yeah, I'm keeping
good,
my
good
eye
shout.
out because nobody's talking about
Yeah.
it. I'm at least just keeping my eye out in the news, and I won't be bringing his name up as I'm bringing him up saying, hey, there's three guys here, but in reality, he's off to the side on his own, hoping to get
Hmm.
into this. While it's Campbell and Raymond that are really the two that are actively fighting for the job. Okay, here is our last coaching system for the preview show here. Tim Lester, offensive coordinator at Iowa. We got two players kind of battling for this job here, Kamari Moulton and Jason Patterson. This is another coaching history similar to the last one. 2022, 2021, and 2018 saw the running back one score under 200 fantasy points. Two of those 3 seasons, the running back had 200 plus carries. None of these 3 seasons did the running back have 10 plus rushing touchdowns. When Tim Lester has a workhorse running back, it is fantasy gold. In 2019, Levante Bellamy at Western Michigan scored 298 fantasy points, 266 carries, 23 touchdowns. Last year, he had Caleb Johnson at Iowa, scored 321 fantasy points, 240 carries, and 21 touchdowns. Looking at these guys that are trying to replace Johnson, Moulton had 84 carries last year. Patterson had 63. Moulton was the preferred number 2, but when you look at that carry distribution, that they're not too far apart. Um, when Caleb Johnson opted out of the bowl game, which kind of then gave us a look at how do the coaches want to view these two guys. And in the bowl game, Moulton had 14 carries, 96 yards, one touchdown. Patterson, 9 carries, 74 yards, zero touchdowns. Do you think either of these guys can be the touchdown hog? Like I mentioned, when we have a good Tim Lester running back, can they be that touchdown hog we want, or will their bowl game production mirror what we see in 2025?
Yeah, I mean this one's kind of a crapshoot. I mean, I kind of think about, if we went back a year from now and looked at this backfield, what would we be thinking? Obviously we knew Lester sort of brought a nice pedigree at the running back position, but we probably would have looked at that backfield and be like, I don't know if there's really a talent in that backfield
Mm-hmm.
that's really going to stand out. Um, and obviously Caleb Johnson, became probably Lester's one of his best running backs of his career, right? And Johnson
Yep.
just sort of took the torch and ran with it. But, if we looked at that backfield last year, it's like, okay, Caleb Johnson, who hasn't done much in his career so far, Patterson, a similar boat, Moulton, who, had some buzz in the offseason, but hadn't really done much. I think he's a true freshman, a redshirt freshman. So I guess my point is, when I look at the backfield now, my first inclination is to be, well, Jason Patterson and Moulton, neither of them really inspire me or excite me. But then again, Caleb Johnson wouldn't have really excited me this time last year either. So, in the question of, is there a guy who, because I don't have too much trepidation that there's going to be a guy who probably they lean on and ends up with around 200 carries. But the question is there a guy who's like good enough to take that and be sort of the 20 plus touchdown, you know, 1,400-yard running back
Mm-hmm.
who's a different level of fantasy asset than sort of just these Sean Tyler's, 1,000 yards, single digit touchdown. That's a tough one to say. I am excited about Moulton. I know he's got pretty good speed. If I remember correctly, I believe Lester compared him to like Aaron Jones, who he coached at Green Bay in the offseason. I'd have to go way back to try to find that, but I do recall something like that. So that excites me, and I will say, like, neither of the names really excites me at this point. But again, like Caleb Johnson wouldn't have this time last year. So who's to say that one can't become that truly nuclear option? I think it's worth making sure you get shares of this backfield as long as it's the right price, right? Like I wouldn't want
Mm-hmm.
to draft either name really that high, but as long as you can get them sort of fairly deeper in the draft, I would want to take as many shots on this backfield as possible. And I think sort of the lower bound is like you're going to get a guy who maybe finishes with high 100 carries, maybe just 200 and single digit touchdowns, and he'll be just solid. I think, but the upper bound we've seen with Bellamy and with Johnson, if things go right, then he'll be one of the best running backs in all
Yeah.
of CFF.
Well, and a year ago, I think it was LaShawn Williams was battling with Caleb
Right.
Johnson for the job. The one big difference from a year ago was both of those guys had gotten pretty significant amount of game carries. So when people weren't too inspired with their names, it's because we had seen them on the field a lot. What I
Yeah.
noticed here with Moulton and Patterson, the reason why you're not too inspired by their names is we just haven't seen them much. You had
Yeah.
Caleb Johnson dominating things, and we have buzz about Moulton. I would definitely want to watch this in the spring and see how the reports are. I'm leaning Moulton in my home league. That's a keeper league. We can only keep 4 guys. I really want to keep a running back. I have Hardy, who we've already talked about today. I don't know how inspired I am to want to keep him. I think I have both Moulton and Patterson. I stockpiled both of them. Um,
Nice.
so I can make a late decision because I kind of was targeting this rushing game, knowing Caleb Johnson would end up going pro. So it's one of those. I like the idea of going after this. I do like Moulton because he seems like he has more buzz. He came in and leapfrogged Patterson on the depth chart, which is the one thing that kind of
Yeah.
stands out to me. Is that Patterson was a year older and he leapfrogged him to get an additional 20 carries last year. I do believe he was a redshirt freshman. So first year he could play. He's their number 2 guy, So with a steady drumbeat in the spring, I will start viewing him as, hey, maybe he could get 12 touchdowns. Maybe he could get 15. Right now, I've still only done a handful of drafts. I haven't gotten any shares of Moulton. I am going to view him highly. I just don't know yet. Is he a running back 3 for me? Is he a running back 4? A running back 5? I still haven't figured out exactly where that sweet spot is that I'd be willing to take him before we get more good news about him in the spring.
Yeah, yeah, I'm in agreement.
All right. I want to thank everybody for watching the CFF Coaching Systems Workhorse Running Backs preview show here on the Let Purple Rain podcast. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. This is the third of a 7-part series on CFF coaching systems, which will be an invaluable tool for your CFF drafts. You can find the entire series at letpurplerain.com. I have links in the description below for all of those articles. I'm going to continue to have amazing guests throughout the series here on the podcast. I'd like to thank today's guest, Justin Leo, otherwise known as Volume Pigs. Just to go through his work again, you can find everything he does at volumepigs.com. You can also find him as a feature writer at campustocanton.com and Fantrax. You can also follow him on X at the handle that you see on the screen. Justin, why don't you tell everybody about any specific things that you have planned coming up in April or for the rest of 2025?
Yeah, well, I'm in off-season content right now, so just doing player profiles, anything that's sort of of interest to me within the CFF space. So we're really just working through different players. I mentioned Damian Taylor. There's an article on him coming. I got one on Telly Johnson that I'm probably going to publish after we finish doing this podcast. So yeah, a lot of player profiles, taking a look at teams. It's a lot of the similar sort of discussion things that we discussed today on the pod, and then I do my own rankings, right? I already released a few of those on quarterbacks, wide receivers, so I'll continue to update that. I do a running back depth chart article, which is pretty comprehensive, covers everything
Mm-hmm.
you really need to know in terms of backfields for all 134 FBS teams. Haven't quite worked in the new members yet, but we'll do that. So yeah, a lot of different resources for those who are CFF inclined, or just interested in college football.
And you can find Justin in quite a few of the uh, mock drafts that I'm putting on and hosting. He's been jumping into those as well. So, any of you guys that are watching, when I put out a call and I'm letting people come in and join those mock drafts, you can be drafting with him as well. It's always great to get experience doing mock drafts. And I'm definitely stepping up the game this year and doing hosting more of those. And I want to thank everyone here for reading and watching at letpurplerain.com and on YouTube. You guys are the reason I can keep doing this work. Your support means more than you know, and I'm extremely grateful. I want to send a special thank you to one of my new premium subscribers, Dwight Peebles. He signed up for a monthly premium subscription. I do want to let you know I offer a 30% discount on annual premium subscriptions. Besides, whether you sign up monthly or annually, you'll also be automatically entered into the drawings for the Battle for the Belt 52-man league challenge. And I have tons of amazing content here coming in 2025. I'm really excited. I'm already starting to shape out pieces of this draft guide, which is going to be the best one I've ever put together, going all the way back to 2008. Once again, please like and subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, check out the rest of my fantasy draft prep shows. You'll find a link at the end of this video. Thanks for joining the Let Purple Rain podcast. Your CFF reign starts here.